Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hear our voice. O God, be kind, have compassion. These words conclude the Slichot section of our service. The lines that follow are quotations from Eicha and from Psalms. Al tashlichenu le'et zikna. Do not cast us away as we grow old. Kichlot kochenu al ta'azvenu. Do not desert us as our energy wanes. The line derives from Psalm 71. There it's in the singular, al tashlicheni, do not cast me away. Here it's plural, a collective yearning on this holy day to be treasured and valued, heard and remembered in each moment, at each stage of our lives. But are we? Surely God loves and listens to us in each moment, despite our deficiencies and in all the diverse expressions of our humanity. But what about us? Do we hear? Do we pay attention? I worry sometimes that we don't. And lately I've been pondering something that I think it's time to share with you. Not because I have a clear answer, but because when a question pulls at us, the most Jewish thing we can do is to give it voice. How many of you saw the movie Oppenheimer? You know, it's the first half of the Barbie movie. The question of Jewishness and how it's expressed is a key theme at the heart of Christopher Nolan's masterful depiction of the events leading up to and following American development and use of the atom bomb. Of course, there's the fraught relationship between Louis Strauss, and Oppenheimer himself. Strauss, assimilated but proud of his Jewish heritage and president of his Upper East Side Reformed Temple. Oppenheimer wishing to mask his Jewishness. But clearly his awareness and experience of anti-Semitism animates both his work on the bomb and his professional drive. Einstein plays a key role, but it's Nobel laureate Isidore Rabbi, portrayed masterfully by David Krumholtz, who serves as the film's moral compass. I must confess, I didn't know much about Rabbi before seeing the film, but I did know a quote of his from a 1988 New York Times article because it appears in Noam Tzion's family participation Haggadah, which we use in my family. Someone once asked Rabbi, why did you become a scientist rather than a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman like other immigrant kids in your neighborhood? Rabbi replied, my mother made me a scientist without ever intending to. Every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn would ask her child after school, Nu, did you learn anything today? But not my mother. She always asked a different question. Izzy, she would say, did you ask a good question today? Asking good questions is what made Isidore Rabbi and Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer excellent scientists, and it's also what pushed all of them at various points to distinguish between scientific advancement and human progress. Rabbi worries in the film, you drop a bomb and it falls on the just and the unjust. Einstein regretted his role in helping to birth the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer, too, had doubts. The physicists have known sin, he said, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose. One of the most bracing moments in the film, a secret conversation between Oppenheimer and Einstein, is fictionalized, but true to the men's real reservations. When I came to you with those calculations, Oppie says to Einstein, recalling a question he had asked the legendary physicist, we thought we might start a chain reaction and would destroy the entire world. Einstein remembers. Oppenheimer says, I believe we did. Asking difficult questions is at the heart of a Jewish life, which may have something to do with why there are so many Jewish scientists. That's also why it's important to give voice to a difficult question, even when there's not a simple answer. Al tashlichenu le'et zikna, do not cast us away as we grow old, says the psalm. But Rabbi Gordon Tucker, one of our more erudite and thoughtful living rabbis, understands this verse in light of another psalm, the one we read each day of Elul until the conclusion of our fall Yantiv cycle. Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai, ota vakesh, shivti bevet Adonai kol yamei chayai. Usually the verse is translated, one thing I ask of the Lord, only this do I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. But Tucker renders it differently. What I ask for is to be settled in life and never estranged or alienated from the world in which that life is lived. To not be discarded as we age is a pretty low bar. Surely necessary, but insufficient. People deserve to feel settled, welcome, at home in the world. And the question that keeps tugging at me is this: what should be done when they're not? When they're not settled, not at home, alive, but on some level no longer living? Or put differently, what do we make of the fact that science has brought so many people to a point beyond which they care to be alive? I've been a rabbi for almost 2 decades now. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat with someone withered and with bed sores. I've held the hands of family members as we said tearful goodbyes to a dying parent, only to visit them again weeks later, still waiting for the inevitable. I've seen people struggling to breathe, but between shallow breaths, begging to die. Now, Chevra, I want to be really careful here, because questions of medical ethics, especially with regard to our mortality, are immensely complicated. Each person is different. Each life, while equally valuable, is unique. Each relationship with the people who will one day grieve our passing is singular and significant. Blanket statements by rabbis about what constitutes a life worth preserving are hollow at best, dangerous at worst. But it's also our reluctance to speak, the fear of opening up a can of worms that prevents rabbis from adequately exploring what I view as a widening gap between modern medicine's capacity to extend life and the life-affirming qualities we so admire about our Jewish tradition. But let's back up, because Jewish celebration of life is no small thing. There are cultures, ancient and modern, that can't hold a candle to the Jewish body of sacred literature affirming life and eschewing death cultic behaviors and beliefs. The Torah is an Eitz Chaim, a tree of life. God is Makor HaChaim, source of life. The Mishnah famously says, one who destroys a life destroys a world. The Jewish toast isn't cheers, or even to your health, as in Greece, nor empty the glass, as in Korea, or to honor, as they say in Turkey. It is l'chaim, to life. Contemporary thinkers have written extensively about Judaism's almost fetishization of life over death. Harvard Bible scholar John Levinson argues that the Jewish notion of resurrection implies the ultimate victory of the God of life. And theologian Neil Gilman says there are texts that make a clear connection in Jewish thought between God's resurrection of the dead and the death of death itself. One source is Vayikra Rabbah, which says God will lead us to a world in which there is no death. And another text is the 16th century Pesach song that we all know, Chad Gadya, in which the Kadosh Baruch Hu slays the angel of death. Gilman says God no longer destroys death in the abstract, but slays its very personification. The very last words of the Passover Seder then affirm the ultimate death of death. But these examples are eschatological. They detail some distant fantasy about God's kingdom on earth. The promise of messianism is seductive, to be sure, compelling to some, less so to others. I'm concerned about the here and now. Whether we like it or not, we live in a world where life is finite, where people that we love will one day be gone, where we ourselves will shuffle off the mortal coil, and the hope is that our lives, like our deaths, and our deaths, like our lives, will be dignified and meaningful. Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai, I ask to be settled in life and not estranged or alienated from the world in which that life is lived. But you may know that traditional interpretations of halakha prohibit self-harm, even to prevent suffering. The classic example comes from the Babylonian Talmud, but it's also famous for its inclusion in our Yom Kippur liturgy. The Ela Ezkara, the traditional martyrology service, which they do, I hear, at some synagogues, it details the execution of Rebeccanina ben Trajan, whom the Romans tortured by wrapping him in a Torah scroll, placing tufts of damp wool on his heart to prevent his quick death, and burning him at the stake. Master, what do you see? His students cry out to their teacher. Galion nisrafin va'otiyot prochot. The parchment is burning, but the letters are flying up to heaven. Master, they say, open your mouth and allow the fire to enter you and take you. His students plead. Rebeccanina replies, better that the one who gave me my soul should take it away from me than that I should harm myself. Later authorities codified Rebeccanina's actions and words. Maimonides, who was also a physician, says a dying person is considered to be alive in every respect. Whoever touches him is a murderer. Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the 16th century author of the Mapah, the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, says, it is forbidden to cause the dying to die quickly, but if there is something that delays his death, one can remove it, for this does not involve any action at all, but rather the removal of a preventative agent. In other words, our tradition makes a distinction between active and passive euthanasia. But what's the relationship between Western medical ethics considerations and Jewish ones? The Hastings Center, which provides guidelines for American health providers on life-sustaining treatment and end-of-life care, they suggest a framework based on two principles: patient autonomy and quality of life. Avram Reisner, a local Baltimore rabbi and noted conservative movement bioethicist, challenges the predominant American ethic and contrasts it with that of our Jewish tradition. From a Jewish religious perspective, these two notions are fundamentally flawed, he writes. Judaism, more than most of the world's major religions, has always respected individual autonomy. God is a creative and commanding presence in the universe, but mankind has perfect autonomous free will to live life as we choose. But ethics and morality are not conditioned by our choices. Their source and direction is eternal. Ultimate choices rest squarely with us under the mandate of God's command to choose life. While I'm sympathetic to Reisner's read of our tradition, as a practical matter, I've tended to favor the approach of my teacher, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who is more permissive when considering those nearing the end of their life, like allowing for artificial nutrition and hydration to be removed in many instances, and encouraging pain relief like morphine even when the medication might hasten death. But there's an important distinction, a meaningful difference between doing something which might hasten death and choosing to end life. And that's the question, I have to tell you, that haunts me this Yom Kippur, the day of the year on which we most confront our mortality. Because I'm a life lover. I think this life has so much to offer. I worship a God of life. I celebrate my tradition's emphasis on pikuach nefesh, saving lives. But what about those who languish, people whose lives are soon ending, who are terminally ill? But meanwhile, their lives no longer bring them fulfillment, joy, or pleasure, and instead are marked by tedium, by suffering, and by pain. I thank God for hospice, which provides palliative care to so many as they near the end of their life, alleviating much of the pain some will bear. But is hospice as far as we can ever go? What about death with dignity statutes? 9 states and the District of Columbia have them. There's a group working to pass one in Maryland. The Baltimore Jewish Council has been in opposition. I agree with Dr. Franklin Miller of Weill Cornell Medical College that some media outlets have romanticized death, describing and prescribing medical assistance in dying as a model for the good death in North America today, he writes. But the media notwithstanding, death with dignity statutes aren't really about romanticizing death. They don't compel doctors to participate. They don't tell you it's better for metastatic cancer patients to die than to live. They are an option for those cursed with a terminal illness. Is there room within our tradition for that choice? I honestly don't know. But if our tradition is truly life-affirming, I think we owe it to ourselves to ask. There are philosophies and religions that equate life with suffering, but not ours. So when longevity also means prolonged suffering, doesn't it stand to reason that there are times and circumstances when alleviating suffering should mean reducing longevity? Again, I don't know. I don't have a clear answer at this point, just what I think is a good and important, albeit difficult question. So in lieu of an answer, allow me to leave you with a story. In fact, it's the end of the story I already shared. You see, while Rebeccanina ben Tradion, wrapped in a Sefer Torah, burning at the stake, refuses at first to do anything to hasten his own death, unbelievably, the Roman executioner determines he can no longer watch his victim suffer. And here's the end of the tale. The executioner said to him, "Rabbi, my teacher, if I increase the flame and remove the tufts of wool from your heart, will you bring me to life in the world to come?" Rebeccanina said, "Yes." The executioner said, "Swear to me." Rebeccanina ben Tradion took the oath for him, and the executioner immediately increased the flame and removed the tufts of wool from his heart, causing his soul to leave his body quickly. The executioner, too, leaped and fell into the fire, and he was killed. And how, you might ask, does heaven react to this turn of events? To Rebeccanina's granting permission to end his suffering, to the executioners increasing the flames, hastening death, the text goes on. Immediately, a bat kol, a divine voice emerged and said, Rebeccanina, ben Tradion, and the executioner are destined for life in the world to come. How do we judge what a life-affirming God wants with regard to life suffering? Is life synonymous with not dying? Is the book of life different from the book of living? Shema kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, hear our voice, O God. Chus v'rachem aleinu v'kabel b'rachamim uv'ratzon et tfilatenu. Be kind and have compassion for us. Willingly and lovingly accept our prayer. This year, I have a prayer. I pray for the strength to keep asking the difficult questions. Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova.